It was supposed to be a fresh start for Joseph and Julie Snodgrass, far from the pressures of their previous life. Nestled within the tropical beauty of the Philippines, Clark Air Base was meant to be a paradise for the young couple. But paradise can be deceiving. Life on Clark Air Base offered an escape from the ordinary, a chance for their young family to grow, and for Joseph to continue his career in the Air Force. But beneath the surface, their lives were about to spiral into tragedy.
The 33-year-old Julie Snodgrass, the wife of a U.S. serviceman, shocked everyone who knew her. She was extremely well-liked, and she had no known enemies.
February 26, 1991, a routine day would soon turn into a nightmare. By sunset, Julie Snodgrass would be her body found in a truck, savagely. Her husband, Air Force Joseph Snodgrass, would soon find himself at the center of a investigation that would uncover deep secrets, rage, and betrayal, culminating in an escape attempt amidst one of the most destructive natural disasters of the century. But fate had one more twist in store. Joseph would make a desperate run for freedom, but nature itself would have the final say. Joseph and Julie Snodgrass met in the early 1980s. They were a typical military couple, young, in love, and excited for their future. Joseph was focused and dedicated to his career in the Air Force, while Julie was supportive and eager to build a life together. Yet, as time went on, their relationship faced growing pressures. Joseph's dedication to his career often left little room for anything else. His rigorous schedule and demanding duties created a sense of detachment from his personal life. Julie, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated, struggling to find her place within this rigid framework. Living overseas without the support of her family, Julie's world became confined to the walls of their home. The vibrant personality she once had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet resignation. As the relationship between Julie and Joseph grew strained, she became more withdrawn, hoping that things would improve.
Julie, as warm as she was to the American community, she wasn't crazy about the Philippines. There were some people, probably not surprising, that didn't like the Philippines.
February 26, 1991 began like any other day at Clark Air Base. But within the Snodgrass home, the tension was palpable. Something was building unseen by those outside their relationship. Julie Snodgrass moved through her morning routine as though everything was normal, but something was different. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured her coffee, her gaze lingering outside the window for a moment too long. Those who knew her might not have noticed these subtle changes, but for Julie, the weight of her situation was profound. To the outside world, it was a normal morning. Yet, Julie had been preparing for something, or perhaps anticipating the inevitable. She had confided to a close friend months earlier that her marriage was deteriorating, but she had not told anyone about the full extent of her fears. Julie had become adept at hiding her emotional turmoil. She spoke in vague terms, never fully disclosing the arguments, the accusations, or the moments of silence that filled her home. Perhaps she believed that if she didn't say it aloud, it wouldn't become real. Or perhaps she feared that once she admitted the truth, there would be no going back. She went about her routine that day, but there was a noticeable change in her demeanor. Something had shifted, and it was clear that the day would not end as ordinary as it started. Joseph returned home earlier than usual that day. That immediately set off alarm bells for Julie. She hadn't expected him to return so soon. Their interactions that morning would be brief, but the undercurrent of hostility was undeniable. Later on, the nature of his arrival would be a focal point in the investigations. Their final moments together were marked by silence. Julie knew that Joseph's mood had darkened recently, his demeanor colder and more distant. But on this day, that distance was mixed with something else, something far more dangerous. By sunset, Julie Snodgrass, aged 33 years old, her body was discovered the next morning in the truck. She had been stabbed multiple times, the result of a brutal and violent assault. The attack has been sudden with no signs of prolonged struggle, suggesting that she may have been caught off guard.
That led us to believe that obviously somebody was in the vehicle with her and likely had a lot of over him or her.
Her body bore marks of extreme rage. The stab wounds were vicious and targeted, many of them concentrated on her chest and abdomen. Investigations would later note the excessive force used in the attack, a clear indication of the intense anger behind it. The violence of the crime left no doubt. This was a crime of passion, driven by uncontrollable emotions.
This truck sitting in the middle of the night on a dirt road in a restricted area where no service member would go and certainly no wife would go. Very, it caused a lot of folks to scratch a lot of heads here.
The police were alerted to the crime scene by Joseph Snodgrass himself. After the tragic event occurred, Joseph reportedly called authorities, claiming that his wife was missing. He attempted to construct a narrative in which they had an argument and she stormed out, hoping to divert suspicion away from himself.
I thought she was going to go cool off. Okay, this sort of thing has happened before. Okay, where she storms out.
The scene and the call were immediately deemed suspicious. The investigation into her death began with urgency and determination. Joseph's call, which was intended to set the scene for an alibi, ultimately contributed to his downfall as investigators pieced together the real story from the evidence they uncovered. The investigation into Julie's death was thorough. Authorities combed through every detail, looking for clues that might explain what had transpired. With no immediate suspects or witnesses, they had to rely on circumstantial evidence and Joseph's account of the day. One of the most telling pieces of evidence came from Julie's personal journal, discovered hidden away in a drawer. Though she had not shared everything with her friends, her journal painted a clearer picture of her deteriorating relationship with Joseph. The entries were infrequent, but the few that were found hinted at fear not just of Joseph's temper, but of what might happen if things got worse. Joseph's story was inspected closely. While he claimed that nothing unusual had occurred, there were inconsistencies in his account. As the investigation continued, neighbors and colleagues painted a picture of a man who was rigid, controlling, and increasingly volatile in his personal life. However, nothing could definitively link him to the crime just yet. Joseph's demeanor during questioning raised eyebrows. His calmness in the face of his wife's death was seen as odd. As the investigation progressed, his composure began to unravel, revealing a man under intense pressure and doubt. Lucy, their housekeeper, she was questioned due to a motive the investigators thought she had, as according to Julie and Joseph's son, she had an affair with Latter.
To be my mom, to some degree, that's what I felt the whole time. She would say, "I'm your mom." I said, "You're not my mom." "Well, I'm gonna be your mom." "No, you're not gonna be my mom. You'll never be mom. I've got a mom. You're not gonna be my mom," and stuff like that. And we would argue about it.
In a turnaround of events, Lucy later admitted to taking a part in Julie.
Explained to her that he wanted his wife, couldn't live with his wife anymore, and wanted her out of the way.
Lucy said that she hired her two uncles who brought a third man with them to finish the job.
So the story she told subsequently was devastating. But see, that's not the end of everything, because, well, hold it. When was she lying? Was she lying the first time or the second time?
When confronted, Joseph denied any involvement from his part in this crime, and he insisted that Lucy, quoting his words, is a liar. Searching the couple's home, investigators found insurance papers stating that Joseph has recently raised his wife's life insurance to $400,000. Investigators also found a floppy disk on Joseph's work desk that they thought had something to do with the case. During the interrogation, Joseph seized a moment where the investigators were distracted and shredded the floppy disk with a pair of scissors.
Now I'll tell you, a couple things go through your mind at this point. The first thing is, how in the world did this man get scissors into the interview? And second of all, how did he get the disc and do this? Whoever was on that disc was absolutely, should I say, death to Joe.
Investigators started to piece together the fragments of the case. The evidence pointed to a troubled marriage and a possible motive for Joseph. However, the complete picture remained elusive, leaving many questions unanswered. The question that haunted everyone was simply why? What could have driven Joseph Snodgrass, a respected member of the military, to commit such a heinous act against his wife? While Joseph was in military custody, the investigators dived into the couple's life and a disturbing picture began to emerge. Thanks to the military lab, the investigators were able to put back the shredded floppy disk, and the facts began to develop in their minds evidently. A letter was found on the floppy disk where Joseph has asked the housekeeper Lucy to hire men who could help in ending his wife's life.
At least 10 times a day I say a prayer that you will have luck down there finding someone. I talked to Josh and Jamie, and they are starting to get real tired of her also. We went to the haunted trail last night. It was just not the same without you there. Please help me with her, and come back soon. If you need anything else, let me know and I will try to send it to you. I have to go back to work now. I love and miss you. Joe.
The deeper the investigation delved into their marriage, the clearer it became that Julie and Joseph's relationship had been unscrambling for some time. Their move to the Philippines, meant to be a new chapter, had only magnified the cracks in their marriage. In the isolation of their new life, Julie found herself more and more disconnected from the man she had once loved. Julie and Joseph's relationship had been marked by increasing tension. Friends and acquaintances later revealed subtle signs of discord that had been present for some time. Joseph's controlling tendencies and Julie's growing sense of isolation and knowledge with his affair with Lucy created a volatile situation. The couple's arguments, once small and manageable, had become more frequent. Joseph's temper flared over the smallest of inconveniences, and Julie had become adept at walking on eggshells around him. As she withdrew emotionally, Joseph grew more controlling. The once loving relationship had devolved into something dark and suffocating. Joseph's behavior at work had also begun to shift. Once known for his strict discipline and leadership, his colleagues started noticing changes in his temperament. He was distracted, his focus elsewhere, and there were rumors of personal troubles that he refused to discuss. On the night of the fateful day, Joseph asked his wife to help him in his work by driving off base to make a payment to an informant he is working with. When she reached the location, she found the men Lucy had hired. In her last moments, she knew that the love of her life was behind her. Julie Snodgrass was premeditated. The intense emotions leading up to that moment had been building for years. Joseph made a decision that would forever alter both of their lives, one born out of anger, fear, and a desperate need to maintain control over a life slipping away from him. Joseph Snodgrass faced a trial that would determine his fate. The prosecution's case was built on the circumstantial evidence such as the letter and the strained nature of his marriage. On July 29, 1991, the jury delivered their verdict. Joseph Snodgrass was found guilty of the murder of his wife, Julie. The courtroom was filled with an emotional mix of relief and sadness as the judge sentenced him to life in prison. For Julie's family and friends, the verdict was a bittersweet moment. While justice had been served, it did little to alleviate the deep pain of their loss. Julie's death left an indelible mark on those who knew her, and the trial had only highlighted the profound tragedy of her end. Joseph's life in prison was marked by isolation and reflection. The enormity of his situation began to weigh heavily on him. As he faced the reality of his sentence, he struggled to come to terms with the consequences of his actions and the loss of his freedom. After the tragic murder of Julie and the subsequent conviction of Joseph, their 3 children were left without both parents. Given the nature of the crime and the family's sudden collapse, they were placed in the care of extended family members. The aftermath of such a traumatic event can have lasting psychological impacts on children. While specific details about their lives following the incident have remained private, it's common for children in such situations to undergo counseling and support to cope with the loss of their mother and the legal consequences faced by their father. Being raised by relatives, they were shielded from the intense media attention surrounding the case, as family members often aim to provide stability and normalcy in the wake of such an upheaval. It is clear that the young children's life was deeply affected by the tragedy, and like many children in similar circumstances, they faced the challenge of rebuilding a future in the shadow of such a devastating past, especially that their memory of it wasn't pleasant.
What I remember is seeing him shaking. Something my dad never did, but I can only equate it to someone with advanced Parkinson's, just shaking out of control. The wakes were intense, of course there was no open casket. I was wishing there would because I wanted to see my mom again, but She was gone. I never got to see her again.
On June 15, 1991, just months after Joseph's sentencing, the eruption of Mount Pinatubo occurred. The disaster was one of the largest volcanic eruptions of the 20th century, dramatically reshaping the landscape and causing widespread chaos. The eruption created a perfect storm of confusion and disarray. Clark Air Base, where Joseph was imprisoned, was severely affected, with the base in turmoil and resources stretched thin. News of the eruption reached Joseph, and amidst the chaos, he saw his chance. The eruption had led to a significant evacuation effort, and the confusion provided a rare opportunity for escape. Joseph seized the moment, making a daring bid for freedom. Joseph's escape journey was fraught with danger. The volcanic ash and destruction created a treacherous environment. Breathing in the smell of sulfur, Joseph pushed forward, desperate to escape the life sentence that awaited him if he stayed. But as the hours dragged on, his physical strength began to fail him, making his flight from justice even more perilous. Authorities, still grappling with the eruption's aftermath, initiated a manhunt to recapture him. The search for Joseph Snodgrass became a major focus of the emergency response. The volcanic eruption had complicated the search efforts, with rescue teams battling both the natural disaster and the challenge of locating the fleeing. The manhunt was intense and troubled with exertion. He drove through the ash for a while and didn't know what to do, and then finally the security police zeroed in on him and he said, "Put me back in jail," recalled Mark Hammond, the Air Force OSI agent in charge of the case. Volcanic disorientation, however, reached all the way to Washington, D.C. The eruption's aftermath ultimately triggered the decision to withdraw all American forces from the Philippines and to close Clark and Subic. The last U.S. troops and ship pulled out of that naval base more than 20 years ago. Hanman remained at Clark into October, overseeing the case against Snodgrass, who was eventually convicted and given a life sentence. The eruption of Mount Pinatubo was a catastrophic event that changed many lives, but for the Snodgrass family, it marked the final chapter of a harrowing story. Julie's death and Joseph's desperate attempt to escape became entwined with the forces of nature, creating a narrative of loss and despair. In the aftermath of disaster and personal betrayal, some stories end in ways that challenge our understanding of fate and justice. The tragic tale of Julie and Joseph Snodgrass serves as a somber reminder of the delicate balance between human emotions and the forces of nature. This story, filled with emotional highs and tragic lows, invites us to reflect on the complexities of human relationships and the unforeseen consequences of our actions. What do you think about the impact of external events on personal tragedies? How do you believe the eruption of Mount Pinatubo influenced the Snodgrass case? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth documentaries on cases that shape our understanding of justice and humanity.